Elena sat at her kitchen table, staring blankly at the mountain of bills spread out before her. The weak bulb above flickered, casting long shadows across the worn wooden surface. Her fingers traced the edge of a crumpled envelope, and her chest tightened. Rent was overdue, electricity was close to being cut off, and she barely had enough left for groceries. Every corner of her small apartment seemed to echo with her failures. The refrigerator hummed in the background, nearly empty except for a carton of milk and some stale bread. She had been fighting so long, pushing herself to exhaustion, and yet the weight of scarcity only grew heavier. She had tried everything she could think of. Working late shifts at the diner left her feet aching and her back sore. On weekends, she cleaned houses to scrape together a little more. She skipped meals, told herself she didn't need new shoes, even as the soles of hers wore thin. And still, it was never enough. Each month, money trickled out of her hands faster than she could catch it. Elena often wondered if she was cursed. It was as if she had been born into a cycle of struggle that would never release her. That night, unable to sleep, she wrapped herself in her threadbare blanket and flipped through the contents of an old box she had kept from her mother. Photographs, a few letters, and among them, a tattered book with yellowed pages. Its title was almost unreadable, but inside were underlined passages in her mother's handwriting. The name Florence Scovel Shinn appeared again and again. Elena turned the pages and paused at a sentence that seemed to leap from the paper. "Your word is your wand. Speak it, and it creates." She frowned. Speak, create. How could words change the fact that her account balance was nearly empty? She read on, curiosity tugging at her despite her skepticism. Florence wrote about affirmations, about speaking words of abundance, wealth, and faith, as though they were already true. At first, Elena laughed under her breath. It sounded too simple, even childish. How could a phrase bring money? Her logical mind wanted to dismiss it, but deep down, another part of her whispered, "What if it's true?" After all, what did she have left to lose? She read aloud one of the affirmations written in her mother's neat script. "I am now a magnet for divine abundance. Money comes to me in expected and unexpected ways." The words felt foreign on her tongue, like reciting lines from a play she didn't understand, but something stirred in her chest, a flicker, faint as the candlelight in the room. She repeated it again, this time a little louder. The walls did not collapse. No money fell from the ceiling, but she felt a slight warmth in her stomach, a pause from the storm of anxiety that usually consumed her thoughts. The next morning, she whispered the same phrase while getting ready for work. Standing in front of the cracked mirror, she said it softly. "I am now a magnet for divine abundance. Money comes to me in expected and unexpected ways." Her reflection looked doubtful, but she forced herself to keep going. All day, between taking orders and balancing trays at the diner, the words echoed in her head. At first she stumbled over them, but by the end of the day they rolled off her tongue with ease. Days passed, and though she still struggled, small things began to shift. A customer at the diner, impressed by her patience and kindness, left her a tip larger than she had ever received. At first she dismissed it as coincidence. But then her neighbor, a kind old woman who rarely asked for help, knocked on her door and shyly offered Elena some cash to babysit her granddaughter while she ran errands. The pay was more than generous. Elena blinked, stunned. Could it really be the words, or was it just luck? Still, she kept repeating the affirmation, sometimes out loud, sometimes silently as she swept the floors of the restaurant or washed dishes late at night. She began to notice subtle changes in herself, too. Where she once slouched with fatigue, she now carried her shoulders a little higher. Her eyes, once dulled by endless worry, began to hold a spark again. Even her coworkers, who used to see her as quiet and invisible, started to smile at her more, sensing something different. Elena didn't tell anyone about the words she was saying. It felt too fragile, too sacred, like a secret thread connecting her to something greater. She only knew that each time she spoke them, she felt less powerless. It was as if the very act of declaring abundance shifted something in the universe around her, or perhaps inside her. One evening, after a long shift, she sat again at her kitchen table. The pile of bills still existed, but it no longer felt like a death sentence. She whispered, almost like a prayer, "I am now a magnet for divine abundance. Money comes to me in expected and unexpected ways." This time, her voice did not tremble. She spoke with a quiet conviction, imagining doors opening where before there had only been walls. The following day, her manager pulled her aside. He praised her reliability and announced she would receive a small bonus as a reward for her hard work. Elena stood frozen, the words echoing in her head. A week later, another surprise arrived. A contest she had entered months ago sent her a letter declaring she had won a modest cash prize. Coincidence, perhaps, but deep in her heart she felt a shift too precise to be random. She realized then that the words were not magic in the way she first imagined. They did not make money appear out of thin air. Instead, they opened her to possibilities she had once ignored, tuned her spirit to notice opportunities, and gave her the courage to receive. For the first time in years, Elena felt hope grow roots within her, and so, with a steady heart, she promised herself she would keep going. Each day, no matter how small the change, she would continue to speak life into her world. Because maybe Florence Scovel Shinn was right. Your word was your wand, and Elena was finally learning to wield it. Weeks passed, and Elena's routine began to transform in ways she never expected. Every morning, instead of waking with the familiar knot of dread in her stomach, she opened her eyes and whispered the words before she even touched the floor. "I am a magnet for divine abundance. Money flows to me in expected and unexpected ways." At first, she still worried about the stack of bills and the numbers in her bank account, but the more she repeated it, the more her fears softened, like ice slowly melting under sunlight. At work, the diner no longer felt like a cage of endless orders and low pay. Something in Elena's energy shifted. She stood taller, smiled more often, and greeted customers with a warmth that surprised even herself. Her coworkers noticed, whispering to each other, "She seems different, lighter somehow." People responded to her glow. Customers lingered longer at her tables, striking up conversations, leaving bigger tips than usual. One man, a businessman passing through town, told her, "You've got a spark, young lady. Don't lose it." He left a tip so large she had to check twice to be sure it wasn't a mistake. The words didn't just change her finances, they changed her spirit. Where she used to shrink into the background, she now found herself speaking up. When her boss at the diner needed someone to organize the schedule, Elena volunteered, and he was impressed with her efficiency. He started giving her extra shifts, and eventually he asked if she'd like to be considered for a supervisor role. The offer stunned her. Only a few months ago, she would never have believed herself worthy of such trust. Her neighbors began noticing, too. Mrs. Thompson from across the hall asked Elena to help her with shopping trips, offering to pay her for her time. A friend who hadn't called in years reached out with a freelance opportunity. Something Elena could do from home in the evenings, writing short reports for a local business. The work wasn't glamorous, but the money added up, and for the first time in a long time, Elena's income was more than just enough to scrape by. But the most remarkable transformation was the way Elena felt inside. She started keeping a small journal where she wrote her affirmations every morning and evening. She decorated the first page with the phrase, "Money flows to me freely, richly, endlessly." She wrote it in bold letters, underlined it, and each time she looked at it, her heart lifted. She noticed her posture changing, her smile more natural, her laughter easier. The heaviness of hopelessness no longer clung to her. Still, doubt did not disappear completely. There were days when old fears whispered in her ear, telling her she was foolish to believe in words, reminding her of all the times life had been cruel. But each time, Elena fought back with persistence. She would sit on her bed, close her eyes, and repeat the affirmations with more force, as if driving the doubts out with her voice. Slowly, the shadows faded, and her conviction grew stronger. One afternoon, she walked into the diner to find her boss waiting with an envelope. He explained that a customer had written a letter praising her kindness and efficiency, and the management had decided to award her a special bonus. Tears stung Elena's eyes as she held the check in her hands. She remembered Florence Scovel Shinn's words, "Your word is your wand." Had her words really brought this to her? The real proof came weeks later. Elena had entered a small local contest months ago, a raffle held by the corner store. She had nearly forgotten about it until the store owner called her one morning with a wide grin. "Congratulations, Elena, you've won second prize." The reward was not millions, but a significant sum of money, enough to clear her debts and give her breathing space. Elena was speechless. She thought back to all the nights she had whispered her affirmation, clinging to hope when everything seemed impossible. And now money was indeed flowing to her in both expected and unexpected ways. What surprised Elena most was how her reality outside began to reflect the reality inside. Before, she felt small, invisible, undeserving of good things. Now she walked with her head high, and the world responded to her confidence. Opportunities seemed to find her instead of her chasing after them. A co-worker asked if she wanted to partner on a small side business selling handmade crafts online. A local group invited her to a networking event where she met people who encouraged her to think bigger about her skills. She began to dream again, something she hadn't done in years. She decorated her vision board with images of travel, a cozy home, and a career that brought her joy. Every night she sat by her kitchen table, the same place where she once cried over unpaid bills, and instead of despair, she filled the room with her declarations. "I am a magnet for divine abundance. I deserve prosperity. I welcome wealth in all its forms." The transformation didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't always easy. There were still challenges, unexpected expenses, days when work was exhausting, moments when fear tried to creep back in. But the difference was that Elena now had a weapon, her words. She understood they weren't magic spells in the childish sense, but powerful seeds. With each repetition, she was planting faith, watering it with persistence, and watching it bloom in her life. One evening, as she walked home, Elena stopped at a store window and saw her reflection. For the first time in years, she didn't see a woman beaten down by struggle. She saw strength, she saw a spark. She smiled at herself, whispering softly, "Money flows to me freely, richly, endlessly." In that moment, she knew it wasn't just about money. It was about becoming someone who believed, someone who refused to let fear dictate her future. She was no longer the desperate woman hunched over bills in a dimly lit kitchen. She was a magnet for abundance, a woman learning to command her destiny, and she felt, deep in her bones, that the best was still ahead. The evening sun poured golden light through the kitchen window, painting the walls of Elena's apartment in warm shades. It was the same small kitchen where she had once wept over bills and empty cupboards, but now the air felt different. On the table lay not stacks of overdue notices, but a neat folder with her savings plan, a vision board filled with bright images of her dreams, and a notebook where she tracked every affirmation she had spoken. The room that once carried despair now pulsed with hope. She sat quietly, hands folded, and let herself breathe in the transformation. She whispered her words again, not out of fear but out of certainty. I am a magnet for divine abundance. Money flows to me in expected and unexpected ways. The words no longer felt foreign or forced. They were a part of her, as natural as her heartbeat. Every syllable resonated with truth. She realized now that she hadn't just been repeating phrases. She had been reshaping her identity, brick by brick, day by day. As she sat there, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from a client she had done freelance work for months ago. He wanted to hire her again, this time for a longer contract with better pay. Elena laughed softly, tears brimming in her eyes. The timing felt uncanny, almost like the universe was winking at her. She accepted the offer immediately, grateful but not shocked. This was simply how her life worked now. Opportunities came, money flowed, doors opened. Later that night, Elena reflected on how far she had come. She remembered the gnawing fear that had once followed her everywhere, the weight of hopelessness pressing her down. She remembered nights when she could barely sleep, stomach empty, tears soaking her pillow. She remembered standing in front of the mirror, whispering affirmations that felt hollow, forcing herself to believe in something she couldn't see. And she remembered the turning points, the unexpected tips, the bonus, the raffle prize, the side jobs that blossomed into new ventures. Piece by piece, she had rebuilt her life, but it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about freedom. For the first time, Elena wasn't living in survival mode. She could dream, she could plan, she could breathe without fear. The affirmations had opened more than financial doors. They had opened doors in her heart and mind. She had discovered strength, resilience, and faith she didn't know she possessed. One weekend, Elena visited a bookstore, drawn to the shelves of self-development and spirituality. She picked up more works by Florence Scovel Shinn, underlining passages, writing notes in the margins, treating them like sacred treasures. She began to see how words shaped not just money, but every part of her life. She experimented with affirmations for health, for peace, for love. And just as before, small shifts began to ripple outward. She felt healthier, lighter, even more open to relationships with others. One day, while journaling at a cafe, she overheard two women at the next table discussing their struggles with debt. Their voices trembled with the same desperation Elena once knew too well. She felt a pang of recognition and an urge to share her secret. Gathering her courage, she leaned over and said softly, "I used to be where you are, and something changed everything for me." The women listened intently as Elena spoke about affirmations, about Florence Scovel Shinn, about the power of words. At first they looked skeptical, just as she had been, but then curiosity lit their eyes. Elena smiled, recognizing that look hope peeking through despair. It struck her then, this was her next step, not just to use the secret for herself, but to share it, to help others unlock their own doors to abundance. She began journaling her journey online, writing blog posts and recording small videos. People responded. Strangers wrote to her, thanking her for giving them hope. Slowly, her story spread. Elena realized she had not only become a magnet for abundance, but also a beacon for others searching for light. Her life expanded in ways she had never dreamed. The money that once trickled now flowed steadily. She opened a small account to save for her dream of traveling, something she had once dismissed as impossible. She started taking classes, investing in herself, building skills she could use to grow her freelance work into a real business. Each step felt guided, as though invisible hands were pushing her forward, But through it all, she never abandoned her daily practice. Every morning and every night, no matter how busy or successful she became, Elena paused to speak her words. I am a magnet for divine abundance. Money flows to me in expected and unexpected ways. They were not just affirmations anymore. They were reminders of who she was and what she had overcome. One evening, months later, she sat again at the same kitchen table, but now with a heart full of peace. She lit a candle, closed her eyes, and let gratitude wash over her. The bills were paid, her fridge was full, and she had plans for a future she once thought was out of reach. She had stepped out of scarcity and into abundance, not by magic falling from the sky, but by daring to believe in the power of her own voice. Her phone buzzed again. It was another client, offering her an even larger project. She smiled, whispered her words one more time, and accepted. She knew now there was no limit. The law worked, the secret was real, and she would never again doubt the power of her spoken word. The woman who once sat in darkness, crushed by fear and lack, was gone. In her place stood someone radiant, confident, and free. Elena understood the truth Florence Scovel Shinn had tried to teach all along. Prosperity was not something you chased. It was something you attracted by who you became. And she had become abundance itself.